Hi, folks. Democrats are at it again, as usual, when they're not busy lecturing us about misinformation. Their own late-night court jesters are spreading it all over the place like confetti. Case in point, Jimmy Kimmel actually tried to pin Charlie Kirk's assassination on MAGA, and now ABC is facing calls to either fire him or hand over their entire broadcast license. Turns out the only thing more unfunny than his monologues is his grip on reality. And then we've got Whoopi Goldberg, looking like she just saw the ghost of her own narrative.
And what assassins should always remember...
What? What is that?
...is just because you take somebody out doesn't mean the message is going to stop. And it's important to keep that in mind, because when you look at our loss of Martin Luther King or name anyone who's been assassinated in this country.
Charlie Kirk.
We continue to fight on. And that's what America offers. It says, listen, you have the right to say and feel however you want. That is a birthright. You're born with that right. So taking somebody out is not the way to do it. You want to fight about something, then go to the ballot box. Go elect different people. Killing people doesn't do anything except make it a horrible world for their children.
It's interesting how Democrats have been cranking up the heat on our national rhetoric for years, and now suddenly they want to say, oh, there's violence on both sides, let's all tone it down. They'll say anything to avoid accountability and spread the blame for Charlie's assassination to literally everyone but themselves. This is the party of zero accountability, and no one can deny it, because we've seen over and over just how far they're willing to go. They normalize hostility as a political strategy. They labeled half the country as Nazis and fascists, and now they're shocked when it boils over into real-world violence. And you can see it all over Whoopi's face, especially when she admits killing him won't stop the message. There's almost this regret, this dread, and as she's realizing his voice is only gonna grow bigger, and that everything she's been fighting for is now in danger of collapsing under its own hypocrisy. But even with this imminent collapse of the Democrat House of Cards, their shills are still going on TV to continue perpetuating their awful propaganda.
J.D. Vance lied today on the Charlie Kirk show when he said the statistics are clear that this is a left-wing problem. It's the exact reverse, right? Exact reverse. You look at the ADL Center for Extremism, which looked at 444 people killed by extremists between 2013 and 2022, 75% of them by the right. You look at the University of Maryland study that was done for their terrorism center, which found that from 1948 to 2018, right-wing extremists more likely to carry out violence than left-wing extremists. You look at the head of the FBI who Donald Trump appointed, Chris Wray, who said the number one domestic terror threat in this country comes from religious and racially motivated extremists, specifically white supremacists. You can keep going. The National Institute for Justice found that the majority of incidents since 1990, violent terroristic acts, were right-wing extremists. The single biggest day of political violence, Chris, in our lifetimes in this country was January 6th, 2021, when right-wing extremists attacked the Capitol, injured police officers. They were ideologically motivated. You and I agreed it was an insurrection at the time. So it's bizarre for Vance to go on TV or go online and say the exact opposite of what both the official statistics say and the think tanks say. All of our evidence tells us. I mean, there was a Democratic lawmaker, Chris, I don't know how many times we have to say this, who was murdered in her home with her husband in June by a Trump supporter. And Donald Trump today said, who? When he was asked about it, he said, who?
Mehdi Hasan is one of the most shameless propagandists on television, hands down. His whole debating style isn't even clever. It's just filibustering with a fire hose of selective statistics meant to overwhelm, rather than actually illustrate or build any sort of substantive point. He rattles off numbers from the ADL, the FBI, or old university studies, but the problem is simple. Every single one of those claims falls apart once you actually examine context and definitions. The ADL, for example, has been caught counting apolitical crimes, gang violence, and even personal disputes as right-wing extremism if the suspect even once clicked on the wrong Facebook article. Meanwhile, the reality is that in just the past year alone, leftist extremist violence has been on a parabolic rise. Think about the biggest incidents we've seen so far. Every single one tied to leftist actors. The Alvarado ICE facility attack, the Boulder fire attack, the United Healthcare CEO murder, the assassination of the Israeli embassy staffers in D.C., all leftist extremists. It's a problem, folks. Now, Democrats love to bring up the assassination of the Minnesota lawmaker as their counterexample, but What they never mention is the truth. The suspect wasn't a MAGA activist. He was a registered independent, no party preference, with documented ties to the Democrats in Minnesota. He was even appointed by Governor Tim Walz to a state commission. And more importantly, what happened in that tragedy wasn't even politically motivated. The man had a psychotic break. It was an act of personal instability, not an act of organized ideology. Compare that to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. His killer didn't just snap. He planned for over a week. We have his Discord messages, and every piece of evidence confirms it was a politically motivated hit. That matters. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. And here's the part Democrats desperately avoid. The rhetoric that fueled Kirk's assassination came directly from the Democrat propaganda machine. That's why the assassin literally inscribed political slogans into the bullets he used. You don't get to spend years calling conservatives fascists, Nazis, threats to democracy, and then wash your hands when someone decides to act on those words. That's why Mehdi Hasan's framing is so dangerous. It's not just bad faith. It's designed to distract from the violence his side has normalized and in this case directly inspired. What happened to Charlie isn't an isolated tragedy. It's the inevitable outcome of political culture where the Democrats have convinced themselves that silencing their opponents by any means necessary isn't just justified. It's actually morally righteous. And that's the ugly truth they can't talk their way out of. Oh, but they're trying their best to do that, but they're clearly not sending their best to do it. Case in point, Jasmine Crockett.
I'd like to ask you to respond to critics who have pointed the finger at Democrats who have used phrases like fascist or Hitler, made comparisons to those things over time. Do you think that that's contributed to this, or are those critics wrong?
They're absolutely wrong. Here's the reality. They don't want American people to know any forms of history. We know that there was news out today about the president going after yet more historical information. The reality is that when we look at what is taking place, when you look at an authoritarian, and what they do is they try to basically say, you have to do whatever the government says, even if that means that your personal freedoms are going to be subjected to.
That's literally what your party does. My God.
Right now, our personal freedoms are constantly under attack.
And just when you think Democrats can't get more shameless, they find a new low. Jasmine Crockett is out here deflecting blame for the very thing Democrats do every single day. Weaponize language to smear their opponents. And let's be clear for a second, folks. Democrats don't care about governance. They care about narrative. They care about convincing you to surrender freedoms so they can seize more power over your life. That's been established for years. And Crockett claiming that calling Charlie Kirk and his supporters Hitlers or Nazis had nothing to do with his assassination, that's just flat out dishonest. The killer, Tyler Robinson, literally wrote, "Some hate can't be negotiated out," echoing the anti-fascist rhetoric Crockett and her colleagues feed to the public on a daily, hourly basis at this point. And history shows us that when you brand people as fascists or Nazis, you justify violence against them. That's why the rhetoric is so dangerous. And most of the attacks on Charlie were built on falsehoods anyway. Debunked misquotes, distorted claims, recycled lies meant to paint him as a racist or a fascist. Crockett doesn't get to walk away from this. She and her party must own the fact that their words create extremists who feel justified in taking lives. If they refuse, then more tragedies are inevitable at this point. But the Democrat gaslighting doesn't just limit itself to the rhetoric that they use and the impacts, the very visible impacts that we've witnessed over the last year. No, Democrats are actually attempting to rewrite history in real time about how they reacted to the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
I think if you look across media generally, you have seen a lot of people trying to grapple with Charlie Kirk's legacy and what that is as a right-wing agitator and as a provocateur and as, you know, a strategist and the most important GOP figure besides Donald Trump, arguably ever. And so, or right now. And so there's a lot of grappling to do, but to suggest that the internet is cheering for this is just the opposite.
What?
Total opposite of what's actually
liar. These people think you're stupid, folks. They think you're beneath them. That you won't notice when they blatantly lie, rewrite history in real time, and mislead you to protect their side. Ultimately, they hate you. And we've known this for years. And what this MSDNC contributor is doing is just the latest example, pretending nobody online cheered Charlie's assassination when we all saw it with our own eyes. This wasn't a handful of trolls posting in the shadows, by the way. The overwhelming majority of Democrat responses online were either celebratory or some twisted justification for what happened. And outside of maybe Obama and a handful of other Democrats, very few bothered to show respect for Charlie at all. In fact, plenty of Democrat-associated voices in government, especially here in Los Angeles, openly cheered it on. That's the truth they're desperate to cover up. And this sort of on-air insistence that the internet isn't celebrating is the kind of defensiveness that actually proves the opposite point. Because here's a bigger picture, folks. Democrats have perpetuated decades of tribalized rhetoric, identity-based demonization, and online radicalization, normalizing the dehumanization of all their opponents. When you constantly call people Nazis, fascists, or threats to democracy, you make violence against them feel not only justified but virtuous to the unhinged. The media's reflexive denials and selective framing, pretending the whole internet was mourning while downplaying the very clear celebrations by Democrats, which, by the way, are still going on, look less like journalism and more like damage control. And if you expect any honesty from MSDNC, I've got a bridge to sell you, folks, because, by the way, this is the same contributor, this is the same person who made a career doxing and destroying Trump supporters. That's the bigger rot exposed here. A culture where Democrats normalize hate, deny the consequences, and then act shocked when people stop trusting them altogether. And it's not only happening over at MSDNC. CNN has got plenty of it as well. And to his credit, Scott Jennings has been having to deal with a lot of it.
It's on the bullet case.
I have seen nothing but Democrats in the wake of this murder saying that it was awful.
You've seen nothing?
What?
I have seen them
Literally nothing?
Elected Democrats.
Exactly.
I have seen them saying nothing but it was horrific, that they condemn it, that they are sorry for his family, that this is an awful moment in the country. I've seen President Trump do nothing but say it was the Democrats.
Oh, okay.
Just jump in here for a second.
She's seen nothing, folks, thus we must believe her. This is how CNN and Democrats think they can operate. Just erase what everyone has seen with their own eyes and pretend it never happened. Problem is, we're not dumb. We've witnessed Democrats mocking, outright cheering, and justifying Charlie's assassination. For anyone to go on TV and claim they've seen nothing negative is not just dishonest. It's the very reason people no longer trust the Democrat Party and mainstream media. Because what's really happening here is bigger than just one bad take. It's a coordinated effort to protect the Democrat narrative by rewriting reality in real time. This is the culture of denial that now defines media environments like this. Downplay the hate, deny incitement by all means necessary, and then feign moral outrage when they're called out on it. And that's why trust in their party keeps collapsing. Americans, we know what we've seen, and no amount of spin is going to make us unsee it.
You have to kind of, but the internet is not real
Can I ask, though, everybody here acknowledges that there have been thousands upon thousands of people, ordinary people, who have taken to social media to celebrate this, yes or no?
I don't know about that.
You know,
What?
I have high school friends.
It literally happened.
Hold on. I just think we should just, we got to be factual about this, right?
That's
I
a
don't
fact.
think you know the scope. I don't know the scope. But I do think that we have to distinguish between
It's gonna appeal to
random
ignorance?
people in the world and something that is a dominant issue.
Because the person who shot Charlie Kirk was a random person in the world, was he not?
Well, here's the thing.
That's the danger. You dismiss the random people of the world. They have access to weapons
assassinations
and
in
hateful
this country.
motivations.
There have been political assassinations in this country before, Scott. Wouldn't you agree?
So?
And they're all
Of course.
reprehensible. And in this
Exactly.
country,
What's your
do you
point?
believe that in those political assassinations in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, assassination attempts, that there were no Americans who cheered that on? I think the
I've not
question
asserted
is
anything
the
of the
question
sort.
is not whether or not it happens. The question
What?
is whether or not we need to
That's
place
just
that
a
at the very
blatant
center
false
of our
equivalence.
political world right now and categorize half the people in the country according to those random people that we now just happen to see because of the internet.
Democrats want to engage in every logical fallacy in the book instead of actually taking any sort of accountability. Yes, America has a long history of political assassinations, but does that mean every single one needs to be trotted out and to warp and dilute the actual point in this situation? The fact is, the assassin was radicalized by the Democrat rhetoric. Just days before Charlie's assassination, CNN itself was running a segment smearing Charlie as a white supremacist simply for pointing out the race of the man who murdered Irina Zarutska in North Carolina. That was on this very panelist show. with guests piling on, railing against Charlie, and now they act shocked when someone acts on that sort of poison. The same Democrats who called Charlie a Nazi, a fascist, a danger to democracy are now claiming they don't know if thousands online celebrated his death when we all saw it with our own eyes. How many times do I have to repeat this? This isn't some random troll on the internet. It's about mainstream rhetoric, normalized dehumanization, and media figures who whip up hatred one week after the other and then wash their hands of it. And honestly, I don't even think these people wonder what happened to their credibility. I don't think they care. They're too busy making a buck because this transcends hypocrisy. It's just moral cowardice wrapped in gaslighting, and it tells you exactly why people no longer trust CNN, MSDNC, the Democrat Party, or anybody who allies with their causes.
Talking about a love-torn child.
What?
A kid. This is probably his first real relationship, and somebody was disparaging the person that he loved.
Are we doing this right now?
He sat on that building for 30 minutes before he took the shot. Why did he wait until the first word trans came up? Then he took the shot.
You think he heard it? He could hear it?
I think he could hear it. I think he also, I don't believe he was motivated politically. I think this was motivated emotionally.
What? So let me see if I got this straight. Democrats spend years dehumanizing Charlie, calling him a fascist, a Nazi, a white supremacist, until someone on their side decides it's an existential crisis for the country and that the only solution is to assassinate Charlie. And then those same Democrats turn around and humanize the murderer. This is the political climate they've built, folks. A culture where they radicalize their own to commit targeted assassinations, then cheer and celebrate the assassination, then deny they ever did it, then try to pin it on MAGA when all the evidence shows the shooter was a leftist extremist. And now we have Montel Williams on CNN telling us we should see Tyler Robinson as a love-torn child, a man who murdered from a rooftop because he didn't like what was said about his trans boyfriend. Folks, this is insanity. This is where our culture is, by the way. Democrats not only excusing political assassinations, but asking us to empathize with the assassin. Just when you think the bar can't get any lower, they carry water for the worst human beings alive. And in doing so, they expose the rot at the heart of their entire movement. And since we're on the topic of scumbags, might as well make a visit at Jimmy Kimmel, who is actually out here lying.
He hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. Okay. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. Demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend.
How do you know?
This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, okay?
There's just so much going on here. First, the fact that Jimmy is now pushing the lie that Charlie's assassin was MAGA, even as FBI investigators, Discord messages, and testimony from his own friends and family point clearly to left-wing radicalization, shows you everything about Jimmy's priorities. The evidence is overwhelming. Robinson's classmates describe watching him get pulled into far-left ideology online. His chats with his trans boyfriend reveal his political motivation, and yet Kimmel would rather recycle Reddit conspiracy theories than acknowledge reality. Why? Well, because truth has never been his job. Hurting Trump and smearing conservatives is. And then on top of that, he mocks how President Trump grieves, as if the commander-in-chief owes late-night television a public display of tears. That's not how adults mourn, by the way. And it's not how presidents lead. Trump lowered the flags, he honored his friend, and he kept doing the business of the presidency. That's what leadership looks like. But the Democrats' demand is always the same. Center themselves. Make it about performance, about optics, about narrative. And that's why their credibility is collapsing. They're all narcissists at the end of the day. They don't tell the truth. They don't respect private grief. And they don't serve this country. They only serve their own narcissism. Anyway, how much longer will we allow ourselves to be told not to believe what we can see and hear for ourselves? How many times can these Democrats, who largely shape our culture, lie to our faces, excuse the inexcusable, and then demand our silence before we finally stop giving them the benefit of the doubt? We live in a moment where truth is treated as optional by these institutions, where power depends on keeping you confused, divided, and distracted. The deeper challenge here, folks, is not just spotting out the lies. It's asking yourself why those lies are necessary for these Democrats in the first place. And who benefits when reality is twisted beyond recognition? At the end of the day, you decide whether to play along with their little games and schemes or to see it clearly for what it is. And once you've seen it clearly, the other question that follows that is, what will you do with that clarity? Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.